The Miller family always felt watched, not by a person, but by the quiet eyes of a stray cat they called Whiskers. It sat on their fence day after day, just observing. They found it unsettling, creepy. One night, Mark Miller, the father, had had enough. He caught the cat, and in a moment of frustration he'd later regret for the rest of his short life, he ended its quiet watch permanently. The family thought that was the end of it. They were wrong. It was only the beginning. That night, the house changed. The air grew heavy, thick with a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Lights flickered and died. A low guttural growl echoed from the walls, a sound that vibrated deep in their bones. They huddled together in the living room, trying to convince themselves it was just the old house settling. Then the first scream came from upstairs. It was their daughter, Emily. They rushed to her room, but the door was stuck. They pushed and shoved, the wood groaning, but it wouldn't budge. Emily's screams turned into choked gurgles, followed by a sickeningly loud snap. The sound cut through the house like a whip, and then silence. The door swung open on its own. The room was empty. The window was locked from the inside. Emily was just gone. Panic set in. Mark grabbed the phone to call the police, but the line was dead. Every cell phone dead. The front door locked. Every window sealed shut. They were trapped inside their own home with something that had just taken their daughter. The torment began in earnest. Whispers slithered from the shadows, speaking their names, recounting their deepest, darkest secrets. Objects flew across rooms, shattering against walls. The temperature plummeted until they could see their own breath. The family was being hunted, played with by an unseen force that seemed to be enjoying their terror. The son, Jake, was next. He was in the hallway, trying to force open a window, when he was suddenly dragged into the darkness. His cries for his father were cut short, replaced by a wet, tearing sound that echoed for what felt like an eternity. Mark and his wife Sarah were left alone, clinging to each other in the dark, their minds fracturing under the weight of fear and grief. They tried to hide, barricading themselves in the master bedroom, but it was useless. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, to watch them. The house was no longer their home. It was a tomb, and their tormentors were just getting started. The invisible forces weren't content with just taking their children. They wanted to break them. Mark started seeing things. He'd see Whiskers, the cat in the corner of his eye, its gaze filled with an ancient intelligence. Then he'd see himself, over and over, reliving the moment he killed the cat. But this time, he could feel the cat's pain, its fear, its life fading away. The visions were relentless, driving him to the edge of madness. He screamed until his throat was raw, clawing at his own eyes to make the images stop. And then their tormentors finally showed themselves. They weren't ghosts or spirits of the house. They materialized from the shadows to towering figures, one male, one female. Their forms shimmered, ancient and terrifying, their eyes burning like coals. They were demons, old as the world itself, Jinn Nora Paisak, beings that walked among humans unseen. The female demon spoke, her voice a chorus of sorrow and rage. "Our child," she hissed, her voice scraping against Mark's sanity. "He chose the form of a cat to walk your world, to learn your ways, to see if you were worthy. And you murdered him." Mark and Sarah stared in horror, the awful truth crashing down on them. The stray cat. It was their son. "A life for a life," the male demon growled, his voice shaking the very foundations of the house. "A family for a family." There was no mercy in their eyes, only justice, a terrible, absolute justice. They turned their attention to Mark. They didn't need to touch him. They reached into his mind, tearing his sanity apart from the inside. He experienced an eternity of deaths, each more gruesome than the last, his screams becoming inhuman, animalistic. He was dismantled, soul first, then body, until nothing was left but a lingering echo of his terror. Now, only Sarah remained. She was on her knees, broken, having witnessed the obliteration of her entire family. The female demon knelt before her, its fiery eyes softening for just a moment with something that looked almost like pity. "You will be our messenger," she whispered, her voice a cold wind. "You will live. And you will tell your kind what happens when they harm that which watches quietly." And then the demon's expression hardened again. The last thing Sarah Miller knew was a pain beyond comprehension, a final world-ending agony. When the police finally entered the Miller house days later, responding to calls from concerned neighbors, they found it pristine, spotless. There were no bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the family had simply vanished. But as one officer swept his flashlight across the living room wall, he saw it, to message, carved deep into the plaster, the letters sharp and precise. It read, "Do not harm what watches quietly." The case went cold, another unsolved mystery filed away. A week later, in that same quiet neighborhood, a new family moved in a few houses down. As they unpacked their boxes, the mother noticed a small stray cat sitting on their back fence. It had different fur, a different pattern, but as it turned its head, its eyes caught the light, and for a split second, she felt a strange, unsettling sense of familiarity. The cat just sat there, its gaze unwavering, watching, waiting. Some creatures hide among us to learn, others are sent to punish. And some families are destroyed because they never learned to tell the difference. Thanks for watching. The Miller family lived on the edge of a quiet town in rural Pennsylvania. It was one of those places where nothing ever happened. Life was predictable, safe, and utterly boring, until the night they killed the cat. It all started on a humid Tuesday evening. A stray cat appeared in their backyard, a scruffy black and white thing with matted fur. It didn't hiss, it didn't run, it just sat on the grass, perfectly still, watching the house. But its eyes, they weren't right. They were too intelligent, too knowing, too human. 8-year-old Emily Miller fell in love instantly. She named it Whiskers. Her father, Mark, was not a fan. He didn't like animals in general, and he especially didn't like this one. That thing's not normal, he'd mutter to his wife, Sarah. It just keeps staring at me, like it's waiting for something. The nights grew stranger. Mark would be jolted awake by a soft, rhythmic tapping on their bedroom window. He'd pull back the curtain, and there it would be Whiskers perched on the fence post, its unnerving gaze fixed on him. It never seemed to blink. It just watched. Soon, the strangeness seeped into the house itself. Doors would creak open on their own, even when they were latched. The scent of damp earth and something sweet, like wilting flowers, would hang in the hallways. Emily started talking in her sleep, but the words were a jumble of guttural sounds, a language no one recognized. Then came the impossible boo-boo. The cat started appearing in rooms it couldn't possibly enter. They'd shut the basement door, hear a faint meow, and find Whiskers sitting calmly at the bottom of the stairs. They'd lock their bedroom and in the middle of the night feel a light weight jump onto the foot of the bed. It was always Whiskers. One evening, as Sarah was tucking Emily into bed, her daughter's voice was a small, serious whisper. "Mummy, Whiskers talks to me when you're asleep." Sarah laughed nervously. "Oh, honey, that's just a dream. Cats don't talk." Emily shook her head, her eyes wide and solemn. "He does. He says his parents are watching us. He says they're not happy." That night, the cat didn't sit on the fence. It sat directly outside Mark and Sarah's bedroom door, a silent, unmoving sentinel until the sun came up. Mark's unease was curdling into real fear. He started talking to people in town, asking if anyone had seen the cat before. An old neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, pulled him aside, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "You gotta be careful, son. Some cats." "They ain't cats," the old man said, his eyes darting around. "Some are what the old stories call jinn, or watchers. They're sent to observe, and they don't like being interfered with." The old man's words planted a dark seed in Mark's mind watchers, demons. The fear twisted into a hot, protective rage. He looked at his home, his family, and saw this creature as a violation, a threat that had to be eliminated. The next day, while Emily and her brother were at school and Sarah was out grocery shopping, Mark set his plan in motion. He found the cat sunning itself on the porch and lured it into the garage with a piece of leftover chicken. The moment it was inside, he slammed the heavy door shut. He expected the cat to panic, to scratch and claw at the door. But it didn't. It turned slowly and looked at him, its oddly intelligent eyes holding his, and then it spoke. The voice wasn't a meow or a hiss. It was a deep, broken rasp, like grinding stones, and it echoed in the small space. "You have chosen the ending." Pure primal panic seized Mark. The neighbors' warning, Emily's whispers, the sleepless night sit, all crashed down on him. This thing wasn't an animal. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, a tire iron, and lunged. When he brought it down, the cat didn't scream like an animal in pain. It screamed like a man being tortured, a high, piercing shriek that vibrated through Mark's bones. In that instant, every light bulb in the garage exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. The air became thick and suffocating, filled with the unmistakable acrid smell of burning sulfur. Mark stood there, panting in the sudden darkness, the tire iron shaking in his hand. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the scream itself. That night, a chilling cold descended upon the house, the kind that sinks into your bones. The thermostat read 70 degrees, but frost was beginning to creep up the inside of the windows. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the house security alarm blared to life. Mark and Sarah scrambled out of bed, their hearts pounding. Sarah grabbed the tablet that displayed the security camera feeds, and she screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. On the screen, the feed from the backyard camera showed two figures. They were impossibly tall and thin, their limbs bent at unnatural angles, like broken branches. They stood motionless where the cat had first appeared. You couldn't make out their faces clearly in the grainy night vision footage, but you could tell they were wrong. Too long, too empty, like smooth, pale masks. As Mark and Sarah stared, frozen in horror, the figures moved. Not by walking, but by seeming to glide over the grass, never getting closer, yet their presence filled the entire frame. And then they spoke. Their voices came from the tablet's speaker, but also from everywhere at once, a perfectly synchronized, flat, dead tone that seemed to come from inside their own heads. You killed our child. The house groaned around them. A spiderweb of cracks shot across the living room wall. The family photos hanging in the hallway began to bleed, thick, dark liquid dripping down the glass. The lights flickered violently and then went out, plunging the entire house into absolute darkness. The alarm fell silent. The only sounds were the frantic, terrified breaths of Mark and Sarah, and a slow, deliberate scratching that had just begun on the other side of their bedroom door. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. See you in the next one.